They blended into the landscape, unnoticed, ignored, dismissed as ruins or storage rooms. Grass grew around them, dust settled inside them, and history moved forward without looking back. But some places are not empty just because they are quiet. Some places are quiet because they are waiting. 80 years after the end of the Second World War, a set of sealed underground chambers in Germany was finally opened. What investigators discovered inside was not dramatic in the way movies portray horror. There were no traps, no sudden shocks. What they found was worse. Stillness, evidence, and traces of lives that never made it out. During the final years of the Nazi regime, as Allied forces closed in from all directions, Germany became a country of secrets. Not political secrets, not speeches or documents, but physical secrets, hidden places built quickly and erased deliberately. Underground cells, improvised detention rooms, prisons that were never officially recorded. These were not the large, infamous concentration camps that history books focus on. These were smaller, quieter locations, scattered across towns, forests, factories, and military facilities. They were designed not to be remembered. As the war reached its final stage, the Nazi leadership understood that defeat was inevitable. With that understanding came panic. Orders were rushed, records were destroyed, facilities were abandoned or sealed. Some prisons were burned, some were flooded, others were simply locked and forgotten. In many cases, local civilians were never told what existed beneath their feet, and for decades, no one asked. The prison cells that would eventually be reopened were hidden beneath what appeared to be a harmless structure. Above ground, there was nothing unusual, just aging concrete, old metal doors, and signs of long disuse. No markings, no warnings, no memorials. Only when structural surveys were conducted for redevelopment did engineers notice something unusual beneath the foundation. Hollow spaces, unmapped chambers, walls thicker than necessary. That was the first sign. When historians and authorities were notified, the reaction was cautious. Germany is a country deeply aware of its past, and any discovery connected to the Nazi era is approached carefully. Permission was granted, experts were assembled, and after 80 years, the seals were broken. The doors resisted at first. Rust had fused metal to metal. Dust filled the air. The smell was not dramatic, but it was unmistakable. Old, stagnant, closed off. Air that had not moved since the 1940s slowly escaped. Inside, the space was narrow. Low ceilings, bare concrete walls, cells so small that standing upright for long periods would have been impossible. There were no decorations, no windows, no comfort of any kind. Each cell had a metal door, a slot near the bottom, and marks along the walls that could not be explained by decay alone. Scratches, repeated, desperate. What made the discovery especially disturbing was the lack of official documentation. These cells did not appear in prison records. They were not listed in transport logs. They were not mentioned in camp registries, which meant one thing: the people held here were never meant to exist on paper. Historians believe these cells were used for detainees considered inconvenient rather than high profile, political dissidents, forced laborers accused of resistance, prisoners deemed expendable, people who could disappear without questions. Once inside, there would have been no witnesses, no trials, no oversight, only silence. On the cell floors, investigators found remnants of straw, once used as bedding. In corners, small personal items were discovered: buttons, fragments of fabric, a bent spoon, objects that suggest survival attempts, not long-term imprisonment. These were not facilities designed to hold people for months or years. They were designed to hold them briefly, before something else happened. One of the most chilling discoveries was the absence of any sanitation system. No toilets, no drainage, only buckets that were likely emptied infrequently. This indicates extreme neglect. Prisoners would have been left in darkness, cold, and filth, not for punishment, but for erasure. On one wall, investigators noticed faint markings, not graffiti, not symbols, tallies, scratched lines grouped together, counting days, or perhaps counting people. No one knows for sure. But the marks stopped suddenly, as if whoever made them never had the chance to continue. During the Nazi era, many such facilities were created hastily as the regime grew more desperate. As bombing intensified and resistance movements increased, authorities sought places to detain suspects quickly. Basements became cells, tunnels became prisons, storage rooms became execution waiting areas. These locations were chosen precisely because they could later be denied. If no record exists, history cannot accuse. But history has a way of resurfacing, even when walls are sealed, even when doors are forgotten, even when silence lasts for decades. The experts working inside the reopened cells moved slowly. Every object was documented, every surface photographed, every marking preserved. Not because they expected dramatic revelations, but because quiet evidence speaks loudest. There were no bodies found, and that, in many ways, made the discovery more unsettling. Where did the prisoners go? In similar cases across Europe, historians have learned that many detainees held in unofficial Nazi prisons were transferred elsewhere, often executed without record or sent to camps under false identities. Some were forced into labor units with extremely low survival rates. Others were killed locally and buried anonymously. The absence of remains does not mean absence of crime. It often means the crime succeeded. As news of the discovery spread, public reaction was mixed: shock, sadness, and an uncomfortable realization. The past is not finished with us. Even 80 years later, new fragments continue to emerge, reminding the world that the Nazi system was far larger, more fragmented, and more hidden than textbooks suggest. These prison cells were not an anomaly. They were part of a pattern, a system that thrived on secrecy, on fear, on making people disappear without witnesses, and for a long time, it worked. As investigators sealed the site again, this time for preservation rather than concealment, one truth became clear. History does not stay buried forever. No matter how deep the walls, no matter how heavy the doors, no matter how long the silence. When the doors to the hidden cells were opened, the physical space was only part of what investigators were studying. The deeper question was harder to answer. Who had been held here? And why were they erased so completely? During the final years of the Nazi regime, Germany's system of imprisonment became increasingly chaotic. The well-known concentration camps were overcrowded, heavily bombed, and under growing international scrutiny. As a result, unofficial detention sites multiplied. These were not places meant for long-term incarceration. They were holding points, temporary spaces, places where people were kept out of sight while decisions were made about their fate. And often, those decisions were never written down. Survivor testimonies from the post-war years offer clues. Many former prisoners described being held in basements, factories, police buildings, and underground rooms before being transported elsewhere, or before simply disappearing. Some were accused of helping resistance groups. Some were forced laborers suspected of sabotage. Some were ordinary civilians who had spoken at the wrong moment to the wrong person. In the final chaos of war, guilt did not require proof, only suspicion. The cells that were reopened after 80 years matched these descriptions closely. They were not built to be seen. They were not marked. They were not regulated. They existed outside official systems, which made them extremely dangerous. If a prisoner died there, there would be no report. If someone was executed, there would be no file. If a family asked questions, there would be no answers. Silence was the design. One of the most disturbing aspects of the discovery was how carefully the site had been sealed. After the war, many Nazi facilities were abandoned in haste, but these cells had been deliberately closed. Doors welded shut, entrances concealed, documentation destroyed. This suggests that someone, somewhere, made a conscious decision that this place should never be reopened. Not because it was unimportant, but because it was too revealing. Across Europe, similar discoveries have slowly emerged over the decades. In Austria, hidden detention rooms beneath police stations. In Poland, sealed tunnels used for executions. In France and the Netherlands, basements converted into temporary prisons during Nazi occupation. Each discovery tells the same story. The Nazi system was not limited to camps and prisons listed in books. It was a network, flexible, secretive, and ruthless. What makes these hidden cells especially unsettling is their ordinariness. They are not grand, they are not massive, they do not look like places history would remember, and that is precisely why they worked. They existed close to everyday life. Above them, people walked, worked, lived. Below them, others waited in darkness. Historians examining the reopened site noted signs of prolonged fear rather than prolonged confinement. The lack of personal belongings suggests that prisoners arrived suddenly. The absence of furniture suggests that they were not meant to stay long. The marks on the walls suggest anxiety, not adaptation. This was a place of waiting. Waiting for transport, waiting for interrogation, waiting for an unknown outcome. Some former Nazi officials later admitted that many unofficial detention sites were used as filters. Prisoners would be held briefly while authorities decided whether they were worth keeping alive. Those deemed useful were sent to labor camps. Those deemed dangerous were transferred to execution sites. Those deemed insignificant vanished without trace. Efficiency replaced humanity. When the war ended, Allied forces uncovered many crimes, but not all. Germany was vast, records were incomplete, witnesses were dead or silent, and some locations like these cells were simply missed, not out of neglect, but because they were designed to be invisible. The reopening of the prison cells did not bring closure. There were no names to recover, no families to notify, no clear answers. What it brought, instead, was confirmation. Confirmation that the Nazi system of terror extended far beyond what most people imagine. That cruelty did not always wear uniforms or stand in camps. Sometimes it hid underground, behind unmarked doors. Today, the site is no longer sealed in secrecy. It is documented, preserved, studied, not to sensationalize the past, but to confront it honestly. Germany's approach to such discoveries is careful and deliberate. These places are not turned into spectacles, they are treated as evidence, because memory, when handled responsibly, is a form of justice. The most terrifying aspect of the reopened cells is not what was found inside, it is what was normal outside. That such places could exist quietly, close to ordinary life, without resistance or awareness, forces uncomfortable questions. Not just about the past, but about human behavior itself. History often focuses on leaders, battles, and dates. But the truth of an era is often found in its hidden corners, in places where no one expected to look, in rooms no one was meant to see, in silence that lasted decades. 80 years passed before these prison cells were reopened, 80 years of stillness, 80 years of unanswered suffering. And yet even now they speak, not loudly, not dramatically, but clearly. They remind us that history is not only written by those who speak, it is also carried by walls, by floors, by spaces that remember. As the site is preserved for future generations, its purpose becomes clear. Not to shock, not to frighten, but to warn. that systems built on secrecy and dehumanization do not disappear easily, that silence can protect cruelty, and that forgetting is not neutral. The hidden prison cells were not an accident of war. They were a choice to erase people quietly, a choice to deny responsibility, a choice to trust that time would bury the truth. Time did not, and it never does.